Imagine walking into a car dealership, excited to ask about your dream car, only to be laughed at, mocked, and kicked out just because they thought you didn't belong. That's exactly what happened to Jasmine. But what the salesman didn't know. She was the daughter of a billionaire. And the very next day, a Rolls-Royce pulled up that left the entire dealership in shock. Here's what happened. Get out. We don't sell to people like you. The words were sharp, cold, and humiliating, like a slap across the face. Jasmine Carter froze in the middle of the showroom, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, she thought maybe she had misheard. But no, the manager's eyes burned with the kind of look she knew too well, one of arrogance and prejudice. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the murmurs of the people around her. The entire dealership had gone silent for just a second, then soft chuckles rippled through the air. A few customers shook their heads, smirking as if they agreed with the manager. Jasmine's lips trembled. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak, though her voice wavered. "Excuse me, I was just asking a question." "Don't waste our time," the manager snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. He didn't even bother lowering his voice. "This isn't a place for window shoppers. Go somewhere else." The salesman who had been talking to Jasmine smirked, almost relieved that the manager had said what he wanted to say. He stepped back, folding his arms, as if Jasmine didn't even exist anymore. Jasmine's face grew hot. She could feel every eye in the room on her, piercing her like daggers. Some customers pretended to look away, but their smirks told the truth, they were enjoying her humiliation. Others whispered under their breath, their words lost in the noise, but Jasmine didn't need to hear them. She knew what they were saying. She wanted to scream that they were wrong. She wanted to tell them that she wasn't broke, that she wasn't just some random girl wasting their time. She wanted to remind them that respect wasn't something you handed out only to people you thought could afford a car. But the words refused to leave her mouth. Her throat felt tight, her chest heavy. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. She blinked rapidly, fighting back the sting of tears. She refused to let them see her cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. So she turned. Quietly, without another word, she walked toward the glass doors. Each step echoed in her ears like thunder, the laughter of the salesman following behind her. She pushed the doors open, stepped into the parking lot, and finally let out a shaky breath. Outside, the world felt different, quieter, calmer, but the pain inside her only grew heavier. She leaned against the hood of her old car, pressing her palms against the cool metal, willing herself not to break down. Her mind spun with anger, sadness, and shame. All she had done was ask about a car. She hadn't been rude. She hadn't demanded special treatment. She had just wanted a simple answer. Yet somehow, they had looked at her, her skin, her clothes, her age, and decided she wasn't worthy of respect. And the worst part? They didn't even hesitate. They didn't stop to think. To them, she was invisible. Unimportant. Less. But what they didn't know was who she really was. Jasmine Carter wasn't just some girl from nowhere. She wasn't someone without means, without family, or without power. She was the daughter of Richard Carter, a name that carried weight in every business circle in the country. A billionaire, a leader, a man whose influence reached far beyond money. Her father wasn't just wealthy, he was respected. Powerful. The kind of man who could buy and sell this entire dealership without blinking. And yet, his daughter had just been thrown out like trash. Jasmine's chest tightened again, this time not with shame, but with something else. A slow, burning fire. They thought they had humiliated her. They thought she would just disappear, embarrassed and forgotten. But they were wrong. By the next day, the people inside that dealership were going to regret every single word they had said. Jasmine Carter might have looked like any other young woman walking into that dealership, but her life was far from ordinary. What no one there realized was that behind her quiet demeanor and modest clothes was a story of privilege, discipline, and a father whose name commanded respect across the nation. Her father, Richard Carter, wasn't just rich, he was one of the wealthiest black businessmen in America. He had built his empire from the ground up, starting with nothing but determination and vision. Now, he owned multiple companies, drove some of the rarest cars in the world, and lived in a mansion that most people could only dream of. Yet, despite all of this, he had raised Jasmine with one rule above all others: money can open doors, but respect keeps them open. From the outside, many people assumed Jasmine must have been spoiled. After all, she grew up surrounded by wealth. But Richard had made sure her life was different. While other billionaire kids were being chauffeured to private schools in sports cars, Jasmine was taught to earn her way. Instead of hiring maids to do everything for her, her father made sure she learned chores. Instead of handing her credit cards with unlimited spending, he gave her a weekly allowance that she had to manage wisely. And when Jasmine turned 16, she didn't get a brand new luxury car like her friends expected. Instead, Richard gave her a slightly used, modest sedan. Not because he couldn't afford better, but because he wanted her to understand value, responsibility, and humility. Jasmine understood her father's lessons, even if at times she longed for a little more freedom. She admired him deeply. He wasn't just her dad, he was her role model. She often heard his words echo in her head whenever she faced difficulties. People may doubt your worth. They may judge you before they know you. But remember, Jasmine, their opinion doesn't define you. What matters is how you carry yourself. That was why, on that fateful day, Jasmine had decided to visit the dealership on her own. She didn't want to arrive in her father's Rolls-Royce or have bodyguards following her every step. She wanted to see how people treated her without knowing her last name. She wanted to experience the world as herself, not as Richard Carter's daughter. But what she discovered was painful. It wasn't just about being turned away, it was about what it revealed. To those salesmen, her skin color, her simple clothes, and her quiet tone were enough to dismiss her entirely. They didn't see a customer. They didn't see a young woman with dreams. They only saw what their prejudice allowed them to see. That evening at dinner, Jasmine tried to hide her emotions. She pushed her food around her plate, forcing a smile whenever her father glanced her way. But Richard Carter knew his daughter. He could see the heaviness in her eyes. "Talk to me, Jasmine," he said gently, setting down his fork. "What's on your mind?" At first, Jasmine shook her head. "It's nothing, Dad." But then, the memory of the dealership came rushing back, and her voice cracked. She told him everything: the laughter, the sneers, the humiliation. She expected him to be angry, maybe to storm into that dealership the very same night and demand answers. But Richard didn't. He listened quietly, his face calm, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When she finished, there was silence. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a small, knowing smile forming on his face. "I see," he said. His voice was deep, steady, and controlled, the voice of a man who had dealt with far worse in his lifetime. Jasmine frowned. "Dad, aren't you upset? They treated me like I was nothing." "Oh, I'm upset," Richard replied, his eyes glinting. "But I'm not surprised. People like that live their lives blind. They judge before they know. And when they do, they always end up regretting it." He reached across the table, resting his hand gently on hers. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying the weight of certainty, "we'll show them who they turned away. But more importantly, we'll show them what respect truly looks like." Jasmine's eyes widened. She didn't know what he had planned, but something in his tone told her one thing for certain: the dealership that had laughed at her today would not be laughing tomorrow. The next morning, the dealership looked like any other day. Shiny cars sparkled under the bright showroom lights, salesmen hovered around customers with their practiced smiles, and the smell of polished leather filled the air. To them, it was just business as usual. But that calm routine was about to be shattered. At first, it was the sound, low, deep, and commanding. The kind of engine growl you didn't just hear, but felt rumbling in your chest. Heads began to turn. A few customers outside stopped mid-step, their eyes widening. Then it appeared. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, sleek as midnight, rolled slowly into the dealership's parking lot. Its glossy finish caught the sunlight and seemed to glow. The iconic Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament shimmered like a crown. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a moving symbol of power and status. The dealership staff noticed immediately. One salesman whispered, that's a Phantom. Another muttered, no one around here drives one of those. Every eye locked on the car as it glided to a perfect stop right in front of the entrance. The air seemed to pause. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a chauffeur in a crisp black uniform, white gloves perfectly fitted. With precision, he circled the car, opened the rear door, and stood tall. Out stepped Richard Carter. He was a man who didn't need to introduce himself. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of quiet power, he carried himself like someone who had built empires and crushed obstacles. His watch gleamed, subtle but unmistakably expensive. He adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate calm, scanning the building before him as though he already owned it. Behind him, Jasmine emerged. No longer did she look like the humiliated girl from yesterday. Today, she stood taller, her chin lifted, her father's presence fueling her confidence. She didn't need to say a word, the sight of her stepping out of the Rolls-Royce was enough to silence the smirks of every person inside. Inside the dealership, chaos rippled. Salesmen froze mid-sentence. The receptionist dropped her pen. Even customers stopped, their conversations fading to whispers. And then, as recognition set in, the shock deepened. Wait, that's Richard Carter. The Richard Carter? The billionaire? Why is he here? The manager, the same man who had thrown Jasmine out the day before, felt his throat tighten. His face drained of color. Just 24 hours earlier, he had laughed at her, mocked her, tossed her out as though she were unworthy of standing in his showroom. And now, here she was, walking back in with the most powerful man he had ever seen. Richard didn't storm in. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded silence. He stepped through the glass doors, Jasmine by his side, and every employee scrambled to look busy, though their trembling hands betrayed them. The manager rushed forward, forcing a nervous smile. Mr. Carter. Welcome to our dealership. What an honor to have you here. Richard's gaze was cool, steady, and unyielding. An honor, you say, he said slowly, his voice deep and controlled. He gestured toward Jasmine. Strange. Because yesterday, when my daughter came here, you made it very clear she wasn't welcome. The manager's fake smile faltered. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Around them, customers leaned in, sensing the tension, eager to see what would happen next. Jasmine stood silently beside her father, watching the man who had humiliated her shrink under Richard's stare. Yesterday, she had walked out of this place feeling small. Today, she walked back in taller than anyone else. The manager stammered finally, Mr. Carter, I believe there was a misunderstanding. Richard raised one eyebrow, his expression unimpressed. No misunderstanding. My daughter told me everything. The insults. The laughter. The way you dismissed her without even giving her a chance. His words cut through the room like steel. Every employee froze. Every customer listened. Richard took a step closer, his voice low but powerful. Tell me, is this how you treat all your customers? Or only the ones who don't look like they belong to you? The silence that followed was suffocating. The dealership, once buzzing with chatter, now felt like a courtroom, and Richard Carter was the judge. And his verdict was coming. The manager's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. His carefully rehearsed sales patter, his fake charm, all of it had abandoned him. Sweat formed on his forehead, his smile collapsing under Richard Carter's piercing stare. Mr. Carter, please, let me explain, he stammered, his voice shaking. Richard lifted one hand, cutting him off instantly. The gesture was small, but the authority behind it was undeniable. The room fell dead silent. Not a salesman moved. Not a customer dared to cough. "There's no explanation needed," Richard said, his voice deep, steady, and commanding. "My daughter walked in here yesterday with nothing but respect. She asked a simple question, and in return, you mocked her. You dismissed her. You laughed as she walked out the door. Tell me," he leaned in slightly, his sharp gaze locking onto the manager. "Is this what passes for customer service in your dealership? Or was it something else?" The manager's lips trembled. He knew what Richard was asking. Was it because of Jasmine's skin? Her modest clothes? The fact that she didn't flaunt wealth? The truth was written all over his face. The silence grew heavier. Even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder. Customers glanced at Jasmine, some with guilt in their eyes. They remembered chuckling under their breath the day before. Now, they shifted uncomfortably, realizing just how cruel that laughter had been. Richard straightened, his towering presence filling the room. He turned, his voice rising just enough for everyone to hear. "Respect," he said firmly, "isn't something you give only to people who look wealthy. It isn't something you hand out when you think it will benefit you. Respect is the foundation of business. Without it, you have nothing. And yesterday, this dealership proved it as nothing." His words hung in the air like thunder. The salesman looked at the floor, ashamed. The manager's hands fidgeted nervously, his face pale. Richard turned toward Jasmine, softening his tone. "Sweetheart, which car was it you liked?" Jasmine's eyes scanned the showroom. For a moment, she hesitated, then pointed toward a sleek, luxury sedan parked near the center. It was the same car she had admired yesterday, the one she never got to ask about. Richard nodded once. His gaze shifted back to the staff. "That one. I'll take it. Full price. Cash." Gasps rippled across the room. The staff's eyes lit up, until Richard's expression hardened. "Except," he said slowly, letting the word linger, "not from this dealership." The manager blinked. I'm sorry, what?" Richard stepped closer, his voice low but cutting. "I'll be buying it directly from the manufacturer. And when I do, I'll make sure they know exactly why. I'll make sure the world knows what happened here." A heavy silence fell again. The implication was clear. One man's word, especially a man like Richard Carter, could destroy the reputation of this entire dealership. His influence, his reach, his voice would spread the truth faster than they could ever repair the damage. The manager's knees almost buckled. "Mr. Carter, please, we can work this out. It was a mistake, I swear." Richard's eyes narrowed. "The mistake," he said coldly, "was thinking you could treat people like they're beneath you. That's not a mistake you recover from." He turned back to Jasmine, offering his arm. She looped hers through his, her confidence radiating now. Together, they walked toward the glass doors. Every employee stood frozen. Every customer watched in silence. No one dared to laugh this time. No one dared to even breathe too loudly. As Richard opened the door for his daughter, he looked back one last time. His voice, calm but powerful, cut through the air like a final sentence. "Remember this moment. Respect costs you nothing. But the lack of it? It can cost you everything." And with that, Richard and Jasmine stepped outside, the dealership left in a silence heavier than stone. The moment Richard and Jasmine stepped out of the dealership, the heavy glass doors shutting behind them, it felt as though the air itself changed. Inside, silence reigned. Outside, the world seemed brighter, freer. Jasmine took a deep breath, one she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her father's Rolls-Royce Phantom waited at the curb like a silent guardian. The chauffeur quickly opened the doors, but Richard paused, turning to his daughter first. His eyes, so firm and commanding inside the dealership, softened now. "You see, Jasmine," he said gently, "their laughter didn't define you. Their judgment didn't define you. You define you. And today, you stood taller than they ever could." Jasmine blinked back the tears threatening to rise, not tears of shame this time, but of pride. Just yesterday, she had walked out of this same place feeling small, humiliated, like her voice didn't matter. But now, standing beside her father, she realized something powerful: she had nothing to prove to people who couldn't see her worth. They slid into the car, and the Phantom pulled away smoothly, leaving the dealership shrinking in the rearview mirror. Inside, the manager collapsed into his office chair, burying his face in his hands. The staff whispered nervously, fully aware that their reputation had just been shattered in front of everyone. Customers exchanged looks, some shaking their heads in disgust at what they had witnessed. And that was just the beginning. By the end of the week, the story had spread like wildfire. Headlines ran across business blogs and local news outlets. Billionaire refuses to buy from dealership after daughter faces discrimination. On social media, people called for boycotts. Videos of the confrontation, secretly recorded by a customer, went viral. Millions watched, outraged at the way Jasmine had been treated. The dealership's name became a symbol, not of luxury, but of arrogance and disrespect. Meanwhile, the car Jasmine had admired was delivered directly to their estate, accompanied by a personal letter from the manufacturer apologizing for the dealership's actions. But when Jasmine looked at the gleaming car in the driveway, she didn't smile because of the luxury or the brand. She smiled because she knew what it meant: it was proof that her father's lesson was true. Respect, Richard reminded her as they stood together that evening, isn't earned with money, but with how you treat people. You carry that respect within you, no matter where you go. Jasmine nodded, feeling stronger than ever. The humiliation she had once felt no longer weighed her down. Instead, it became fuel, a reminder of her strength and her father's wisdom. The dealership had tried to make her feel invisible. Instead, they had made her unforgettable. And from that day on, Jasmine promised herself one thing: no matter how the world judged her, she would always walk with her head held high. Because true worth, she realized, doesn't come from the cars you drive or the money in your pocket. It comes from respect, both the kind you give, and the kind you never allow anyone to take away. And that's how Jasmine turned humiliation into strength, and how her father taught the world a priceless lesson about respect. Gemstone: if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories just like this. Your support keeps us bringing you more inspiration every day. See you in the next one.